Before your attention wanders, before you try to rationally understand why you've come here, the Virgin Mary asks for something immediate and sincere. Share this message and leave a comment, even if it's just one word, because every act of participation creates an invisible chain that heaven uses to reach those who haven't yet been alerted. This isn't an ordinary video, just another reflection or a coincidence produced by an algorithm. If you're listening to these words, it's because your soul has been silently touched, because there's something that must be remembered before the noise of the world once again fills your inner space. The Blessed Mother doesn't reveal herself when all is calm, but when spiritual slumber becomes dangerous, when people still believe but have stopped watching, when they pray but no longer listen. She speaks today with a gentle voice, yet one filled with urgency, a voice that doesn't want to frighten but to awaken, because heaven doesn't warn to condemn but to protect. You didn't get here by chance. You arrived because this time demands attention, coherence, and decision, and because something important can no longer be postponed. The Virgin Mary reveals that this period in humanity is marked by a silent deception, the illusion of normality. Everything seems to be working, routines continue, life goes on, but the spirits of many people are weakened, distracted, and weary without understanding why. She sees how her children have grown accustomed to living with a constant unease, with an anxiety disguised as normality, with a mild but persistent sadness that no longer surprises anyone. Mary explains that this state did not arise overnight. It was built slowly through small renunciations of prayer, prolonged spiritual silences, and decisions made without consulting God. The enemy, she says, does not always advance with violent attacks, but with constant distractions, with haste, with information overload, and with the false sense that there will always be time later. That is why this message comes now, when there is still room to awaken, correct, and strengthen what has been neglected. According to the Virgin Mary, many people these days feel an inner disquiet they cannot explain, as if something were approaching, as if the soul were perceiving a movement the mind cannot yet comprehend. She clarifies that these sensations are not the product of fear, but rather signs of spiritual sensitivity, inner warnings granted out of mercy. Mary reminds us that heaven always touches the inner self first, before allowing something to manifest outwardly, because God does not act with cruel surprise, but with loving warning. However, she observes that many ignore these signs, not out of malice, but out of exhaustion, a lack of silence, or the habit of living disconnected from their hearts. The Virgin insists that those who learn to listen now will go through what is coming with peace. Those who choose to ignore it will feel confusion, but those who act and prepare will find refuge even in the midst of uncertainty. This call is not collective or generic. It is personal, intimate, and direct, because each soul knows exactly which area of its life needs realignment. Mary also reveals that the greatest danger of our time will not be a sudden tragedy, but a lack of discernment. She explains that many will confuse comfort with peace, distraction with rest, and the absence of conflict with spiritual protection. Therefore, she insists that true preparation does not begin externally, but with inner consistency, with how we live when no one is watching, with the small decisions that define the strength of our souls. The Virgin warns that it is not enough to believe in word if daily life contradicts that faith, because faith is not an occasional emotion, but a constant orientation of the heart. She asks that this message be taken seriously, not with fear, but with loving responsibility, because every call ignored cools the spirit a little more, while every call heeded restores a protection that seemed weakened. At the end of this first part, the Virgin Mary turns her gaze to the listener and makes a clear request. Do not keep this message to yourself. Sharing it can be the chosen instrument for someone else to awaken, react, or avoid a wrong decision made in solitude. Mary promises to intercede in a special way for those who comment and share, not for public visibility, but for the spiritual intention of serving as a bridge. This message is just beginning, and what will be revealed in the next part will delve even deeper into the silent deception that keeps many souls asleep, and how to recognize it before it causes further inner harm. Stay attentive. Don't tune out now, because the Virgin continues speaking, and the most delicate part is yet to come. The Virgin Mary reveals that one of the greatest dangers of our time is dormant faith, the kind that is not completely lost, but ceases to guide. She explains that millions still believe in God, but no longer allow that faith to influence their daily decisions, their priorities, their silences. The Mother observes how faith has become merely decorative for many, present in words but absent in actions, active in times of need and dormant in times of apparent stability. Mary says that this slumber is more dangerous than outright denial, because those who deny seek, but those who believe they are already will cease to watch. Therefore, her call is not to condemn, but to gently shake, to remind us that living faith demands attention, consistency, and perseverance. If these words make you uncomfortable, do not run from that feeling. It may be your spirit reacting to being awakened after a long silence. The Virgin explains that faith weakens when it is replaced by routine, when prayer becomes rushed, mechanical, or non-existent, and when trust is placed more in human structures than in God. She sees how many rely on quick fixes for deep problems, seeking immediate relief for spiritual wounds that require time, silence, and surrender. Mary says that constant distraction is one of the modern enemy's most effective weapons, because it keeps the mind occupied while the heart slowly empties. It is not necessary to lead a person into grave sins when it is enough to distance them from recollection, inner examination, and listening. The mother weeps to see her children weary for no apparent reason, irritable without understanding why, unaware that their souls cry out for guidance, not for more encouragement. According to the Virgin Mary, many have confused faith with custom, tradition with a living relationship, and protection with comfort. She clarifies that true faith does not numb the conscience, but awakens it. It does not justify mistakes, but illuminates them. It does not promise an absence of problems, but strength to overcome them. In this time, she says, it will be increasingly easy to live distracted and increasingly difficult to remain attentive, which is why those who choose to be vigilant will be seen as strangers in a world accustomed to superficiality. Mary encourages us not to fear this difference, because it is precisely this inner clarity that will allow us to discern when others are confused. Living faith, she explains, is quiet but sustains. It does not impose, but guides. It does not depend on favorable circumstances, because it is rooted in truth. The Virgin Mary also warns that dormant faith weakens the spiritual protection of the home without anyone immediately noticing. She explains that it's not a lack of visible blessings, but rather small inner cracks that over time allow discouragement, conflict, and confusion to enter. Mary insists that no home weakens suddenly. First, prayer cools. Then the absence of spiritual dialogue becomes normalized. And finally, life is lived without perceiving God's presence in daily life. But she also affirms with hope that what has been dormant can be awakened, and that a single sincere decision can restore what seemed lost. God doesn't demand perfection, He demands willingness. As we conclude this second part, the Virgin Mary again asks for a simple yet profound gesture. Share this message and leave a comment, because doing so not only strengthens your own commitment, but also allows this warning to reach others who are still walking without understanding the source of their inner weariness. Mary promises to accompany especially those who decide to act, because every awakened soul becomes a light for another. The message is not yet over, and in the next part the Virgin will speak of the invisible signs that are already present and that many ignore, signs that can make a profound difference for those who learn to recognize them in time. Stay tuned, do not turn away now, because what follows demands even greater discernment and openness of heart. The Virgin Mary reveals that one of the most silent and dangerous evils of our time is dormant faith, a faith that has not entirely disappeared but has ceased to govern our inner lives. She explains that millions of people still believe in God, still pronounce His name, still keep religious symbols in their homes, but they no longer allow that faith to guide their daily decisions, their priorities, their thoughts, or even their silences. The mother observes with sorrow how faith has slowly been displaced from the center to the margins, transformed into a memory, a tradition, an inherited custom, but no longer a living compass. Mary says that this slumber doesn't cause immediate alarm, because everything seems to be functioning outwardly, but inwardly the soul weakens, loses discernment, and becomes vulnerable without realizing it. That is why her voice rises now, not with shouts or threats, but with a maternal firmness that seeks to awaken before the spiritual cooling becomes profound. The Virgin explains that faith never dies suddenly. It weakens little by little when prayer is postponed, when inner silence is replaced by constant noise, when trust is placed more in human solutions than in God's guidance. She sees how many begin the day without offering it up, end the night without examining it, and go through life without asking themselves where they are walking spiritually. Mary reveals that the modern enemy doesn't need to attack violently when he succeeds in keeping people busy, distracted and tired, because a tired soul lowers its guard and a tired faith ceases to watch. She affirms that this weariness doesn't always come from physical exertion, but from the spiritual emptiness accumulated by living disconnected from the inner source. According to the Virgin Mary, many souls have confused peace with comfort, rest with escapism, and well-being with the absence of conflict. She clarifies that true peace does not numb the conscience, but rather orders the heart. It does not avoid profound questions, but helps us confront them. It does not eliminate trials, but gives us the strength to overcome them. Mary observes that a dormant faith avoids inner conflict in the short term, but generates confusion in the long term because it does not confront what needs to be corrected. She laments seeing so many of her children justifying minor inconsistencies, normalizing attitudes that chill the spirit, and postponing decisions they know they must make. The mother explains that each postponement weakens spiritual sensitivity a little more until one reaches a point where the inner voice is barely audible. The Virgin Mary also warns that dormant faith creates a false sense of security, leading one to believe that everything is fine simply because nothing serious has happened yet. She says that many think that as long as there are no major visible problems, there is no reason to change, failing to realize that spiritual preparation always occurs before upheavals, not during them. Mary teaches that living faith is vigilant, attentive, humble, and willing to examine one's own life, while dormant faith clings to the past and avoids the present. She does not accuse, she does not shame, but she does illuminate with truth, because truth, when received with humility, liberates even when it is uncomfortable. The Virgin Mary observes that this spiritual slumber affects not only the individual, but also entire families. She explains that when faith ceases to be shared, when prayer disappears from the family routine, when God is no longer invoked naturally, the home grows spiritually cold without anyone immediately noticing. It is not a matter of punishment or visible absences, but rather a gradual loss of inner protection, patience, discernment, and peace. Mary affirms that many conflicts that seem normal today originated in a spiritually neglected home, not out of malice, but out of forgetfulness. However, she also assures us that no home is truly lost as long as there is a willingness to awaken and return. Mary reveals that awakening faith doesn't require extraordinary gestures, but rather sincere decisions. speaking with God again, rediscovering silence, ordering priorities, correcting attitudes, forgiving with humility, and reevaluating the course of one's life. She says that God doesn't demand immediate perfection, but progressive consistency, and that heaven stirs when the heart opens with truth. Dormant faith fears change because it fears losing comfort, but living faith understands that no comfort is worth more than true peace. The Virgin encourages us not to fear this awakening, even if it initially causes discomfort, because every awakening begins with a gentle jolt. The Virgin Mary also warns that many will resist these words, not because they are false, but because they touch upon areas that require renunciation. She explains that spiritual pride, self-sufficiency, and habit are great obstacles to awakening. However, she assures that those who humbly accept correction receive a special grace, an inner clarity that cannot be rationally explained. Mary promises that those who awaken their faith begin to see with greater serenity, to decide more calmly, and to walk with a certainty that does not depend on external circumstances. As this section draws to a close, the Virgin Mary addresses the listener directly once more, offering a specific plea. Do not let these words be lost. Sharing this message and leaving a comment is not an empty gesture, but a way to engage your heart with what you have heard. Mary affirms that many would awaken if someone close to them had the courage to share a timely warning. That is why she looks with tenderness upon those who act, because every soul that awakens strengthens another. Dormant faith can be awakened, protection can be restored, and the course can be corrected, but the present moment should not be disregarded. This message is not yet complete. In the next part, the Virgin Mary will speak more deeply about the invisible signs that are already present, about the inner anxieties that many feel and do not know how to interpret, and about how to discern without falling into fear or confusion. Remain attentive. Do not withdraw now, because what follows is even more delicate and decisive for those who wish to remain steadfast in the times to come. The Virgin Mary reveals that, before events manifest themselves visibly, heaven always begins by speaking in silence. She explains that many people these days feel that something is amiss, as if the world were continuing on its normal course while their inner selves remain restless, alert, and sensitive. Mary says that these feelings should not be ignored or ridiculed because they are invisible signs, subtle warnings that the soul receives before the mind understands them. Heaven does not entrust its warnings solely to grand external signs, but touches the heart first, awakening profound questions, gentle discomforts, and spiritual memories that seemed dormant. Whoever learns to listen to these inner signs listens in time. Those who ignore them risk losing discernment at the very moment they need it most. The Virgin Mary explains that many of these signs manifest as weariness of the soul, not the body. People rest, but don't feel refreshed. They find distraction, but not relief. They go through their routines, but feel an emptiness that nothing seems to fill. She affirms that this weariness is not illness or weakness, but a call, an inner alarm, indicating that something important is being neglected. Mary observes that the world offers many ways to numb this emptiness, but few opportunities to truly heal it. Constant distractions, excessive stimulation, endless noise, all contribute to silencing the inner voice that insists on being heard. That is why the Virgin warns that those who flee from these signs are not protecting themselves, but weakening themselves because the soul needs to be cared for, not ignored. According to the Virgin Mary, another frequent invisible sign is sudden restlessness. Thoughts that return without explanation, questions that didn't arise before, desires to change habits, to resume prayer, to seek a more spiritually ordered life. She clarifies that these restlessnesses are not the fruit of fear, but of the Spirit awakening what was dormant. Mary laments that many mistake these promptings for anxiety and try to silence them quickly, when in reality they could be the beginning of a profound transformation. Spiritual restlessness, when embraced with humility, becomes discernment. When repressed, it transforms into anguish. The mother teaches that not all unease should be eliminated immediately. Some should be listened to attentively. The Virgin Mary also reveals that dreams, sudden memories from the past, and intense emotions that arise without apparent cause can be part of this invisible language. She explains that heaven touches different areas of the inner self, according to the needs of each soul, stirring memories, confronting unhealed wounds, and awakening forgotten desires for reconciliation and change. Mary insists that God does not stir things up to confuse, but to heal, and healing only occurs when the person stops and listens. Always living outwardly, without space for reflection, prevents these signs from fulfilling their purpose. That is why the Virgin invites us to reclaim moments of silence, not as a burdensome obligation, but as a necessary refuge for the weary soul. Mary warns that these invisible signs will intensify for many, not as punishment, but as a final call before important decisions. She says that some will feel clarity and peace as they correct their course, while others will feel resistance when trying to move forward without changing anything. This resistance, she explains, is also a sign because it reveals which areas are being defended out of fear, attachment, or habit. The Virgin assures us that no one is abandoned during this process, and that each person receives exactly the light they need to take the next step, no more and no less. The problem is not a lack of signs, but a lack of willingness to listen to them. As this section draws to a close, the Virgin Mary tenderly addresses the listener, asking them not to minimize what they have recently felt. She affirms that invisible signs are delicate gifts, and that to disregard them is to close a door that heaven carefully opened. Sharing this message and leaving a comment is also a way to publicly acknowledge that something has been touched within, that a yearning has been awakened, and that the heart does not wish to return to its slumber. Mary promises to accompany with special protection those who choose to listen and act, because inner obedience always precedes lasting peace. This message is not yet complete. In the next part, the Virgin Mary will speak of an even more subtle deception spreading in the modern world and how many people mistake progress for spiritual emptiness. She will reveal how to protect oneself inwardly without falling into extremes or fear, and how to remain steadfast when others begin to be confused. Stay tuned. Do not turn back now, because what follows is key to understanding how to live in these times without losing peace. The Virgin Mary reveals that there is a particularly subtle deception that has spread in our time, and that many do not recognize because it presents itself as progress, efficiency, and normality. She explains that not everything new leads to inner life, and not everything that speeds up routine strengthens the soul. Mary observes how humanity has learned to communicate faster, consume more information, and resolve external matters more easily, but at the same time has forgotten how to dwell in silence, listen to one's conscience, and discern deeply. This modern deception is not openly opposed to faith. She tolerates it as long as it doesn't interfere, accepts it as long as it doesn't cause discomfort, and keeps it in a corner so it doesn't alter real decisions. The Virgin warns that when faith is allowed only as an accessory and not as a guide, the heart is exposed to a slow confusion that erodes spiritual clarity. Maria explains that the world constantly offers emotional shortcuts to avoid encountering oneself. Distracting stimuli, narratives that justify everything, promises of immediate well-being that demand no inner change. She says that this constant flow of distraction creates people who are informed but not formed, busy but not grounded, satisfied for moments but empty in the long run. The mother observes that many souls learn to avoid discomfort by interfering with it, instead of listening to it and understanding it. In this way, the deception is strengthened because the person no longer knows how to distinguish between relief and healing, between comfort and true peace. Maria insists that the peace that comes from God orders life even when it requires renunciation, while false peace numbs the conscience so that nothing changes. The Virgin Mary also reveals that this deception disguises itself as absolute tolerance, where any truth that demands consistency is seen as rigidity, and any invitation to change is interpreted as judgment. She clarifies that true mercy does not eliminate truth, it accompanies it with patience. Without truth, mercy becomes confusion. Without mercy, truth becomes harshness. Modern deception disrupts this balance, pushing many to live without clear reference points, making decisions based solely on fluctuating emotions. Mary warns that a faith guided only by emotion easily weakens because it lacks deep roots when trials arrive. Therefore, she invites us to cultivate a mature faith, capable of discerning, even when feeling good does not align with doing what is right. According to the Virgin Mary, another aspect of this deception is the normalization of spiritual weariness as if it were an inevitable condition of modern life. She sees how many accept living inwardly, exhausted, irritable and confused, believing that this is simply part of adult life. Mary explains that this weariness is not natural. It is a sign of a life disconnected from the inner source. When God ceases to be a priority, the inner burden is redistributed onto limited human strength, and the soul is worn down. The deception persuades people to keep moving forward without pausing, to produce without reflecting, to consume without giving thanks, until they lose the ability to hear the still, guiding voice. The Virgin Mary warns that this deception is not broken by speeches or impositions, but by personal and silent decisions. She teaches that each person must reclaim spaces of truth, moments of sincere prayer, times of silence without distractions, and daily acts of consistency that align one's life with one's beliefs. Mary says that it is not necessary to abandon the world, but to inhabit it with discernment, without allowing external noise to govern one's inner self. Those who learn to live in this way, the Virgin affirms, develop a stability that does not depend on trends or external pressures, and this stability becomes a form of protection. As we approach the end of this section, the Virgin Mary makes a clear and loving appeal. Do not accept as normal that which extinguishes your spirituality. She invites us to examine what we consume, what we listen to, what occupies our time, and what governs our hearts. Sharing this message and leaving a comment is also a way of declaring inwardly that we do not wish to live in a state of numbness, that we seek a living and conscious faith. Mary promises to accompany with special tenderness those who decide to break free from this modern deception and walk with greater clarity, because every step taken truly attracts light and protection. This message continues. In the next part, the Virgin Mary will speak about the home, invisible protection, and how small daily decisions can strengthen or weaken the spiritual atmosphere in which we live. What follows is essential for those who wish to preserve peace and coherence in an increasingly confusing world. Stay tuned, do not turn away now, because each part prepares your heart for what will be revealed next. The Virgin Mary reveals that one of the most sensitive and neglected areas in our time is the home, not only as a physical space, but also as a spiritual territory. She explains that many are concerned with protecting the external aspects, but forget that the true atmosphere of a home is formed in the invisible, in the words spoken, the silences tolerated, and the presence or absence of God in daily life. Mary observes that many homes maintain an appearance of stability, while internally they weaken. not through major ruptures, but through repeated small oversights. The prayers that were put off, the forgiveness that was withheld out of pride, the spiritual conversations that were never resumed, all of this slowly chills the inner atmosphere. The Virgin Mary warns that no home is lost overnight. First the spirit grows cold, and only then do visible conflicts appear. The Mother explains that when the home ceases to be a place of retreat, it becomes more vulnerable to constant tension, emotional exhaustion, and confusion. She says that many arguments that seem normal today have deep spiritual roots, not because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of silence, listening, and inner alignment. Mary insists that the strongest protection comes not from external structures, but from the inner coherence of those who live in the house. A home where prayer is offered, even briefly, where forgiveness is given, even if it is difficult, and where God is sought sincerely, becomes a refuge even in uncertain times. The Virgin affirms that this protection is invisible, yet real, and it acts before difficulties reach their peak. According to the Virgin Mary, the enemy seeks to weaken families not through direct attacks, but by fostering gradual estrangement among those who live together. Less dialogue, more distraction, less patience, more irritation, less shared time, more isolation within the same space. She observes how families coexist, yet fail to connect, share a roof, but lack purpose, speak, but do not listen. This state, Mary explains, erodes spiritual protection because love needs to be consciously cultivated. A home is not strengthened merely by coexistence, but by daily choices of care, respect, and spiritual presence. The Virgin Mary also warns that when a home becomes spiritually fragile, its members seek solace outside, exposing themselves to influences that are not always constructive. She explains that a heart that finds no peace within its own environment becomes more vulnerable to external deceptions. Therefore, she insists that the restoration of the home begins with simple gestures, rediscovering sincere prayer, even if brief, blessing the day and night, invoking God's presence amidst daily life. Mary affirms that these acts, though small, create invisible walls that protect against greater conflicts. Heaven acts where there is humility, even where there is no perfection. The Blessed Mother assures us that many underestimate the spiritual power of the home because they don't see immediate results. She reminds us that the unseen always acts first, preparing the ground before any visible manifestation. A spiritually protected home is not free from problems, but it possesses an inner strength that allows it to overcome them without breaking. Mary promises that wherever her intercession is sincerely invoked, she remains, protects, and warns before the damage becomes profound. The protection of the home is not a one-time act, it is a constant attitude of the heart. As this section draws to a close, the Virgin Mary makes a direct appeal. Examine your home with honesty and tenderness. Not to blame, but to restore. Sharing this message and leaving a comment is also an inner declaration that you wish to protect not only your own life, but also the environment where those you love live. Mary promises to look with special care upon the homes that choose to awaken spiritually, because every restored home becomes a silent beacon for others. This message is not yet over, and in the next section, the Virgin will speak of inner preparation, of the quiet changes that strengthen the soul, and of how to remain steadfast even when everything around seems unstable. Stay alert and don't disconnect now, because each revelation leads to a deeper understanding of how to navigate these times with peace, clarity, and trust in God. The Virgin Mary reveals that the most important preparation for these times is not external, visible, or noisy, but profoundly internal. She explains that many people seek signs, strategies, and formulas to feel secure, when what heaven asks for is something quieter and more demanding: coherence of heart. Mary says that true preparation doesn't begin with drastic changes that others can see, but with small internal decisions that bring order to life from within. Preparing inwardly means learning to say no to what steals peace and yes to what strengthens conscience, even when no one applauds that effort. The Virgin insists that those who strengthen their inner selves can weather any storm without getting lost, while those who neglect their souls are easily disoriented by the first headwind. Mary explains that this preparation requires a return to silence, not as an escape, but as an encounter. She observes that many people fear silence because it brings to the surface questions that have been postponed for years, wounds that have not healed, and decisions that need to be revisited. However, the Virgin teaches that silence is the place where God orders, clarifies, and strengthens, not where he confuses. Constant noise may temporarily distract, but it does not heal. Only silence inhabited with humility allows the soul to regain its direction. The Mother encourages us to create small daily spaces for listening, even if they are uncomfortable at first, because it is there that the preparation begins to take real shape. According to the Virgin Mary, inner preparation also means honestly examining one's habits. She explains that many weaknesses persist, not due to a lack of strength, but rather a lack of awareness. When a person stops examining their attitudes, they normalize behaviors that erode their peace. Mary teaches that inner preparation is not perfectionism, but loving vigilance, observing thoughts, words, and reactions without self-deception, allowing the truth to illuminate without condemning. Those who learn this inner practice develop a sensitivity that allows them to correct their course before greater harm is done. The Virgin Mary also reveals that inner preparation strengthens freedom. She explains that those who live distracted react impulsively to fear, pressure, or confusion, while those who prepare themselves inwardly respond with discernment and calm. This inner freedom, Mary says, is not improvised in the moment of trial. It is cultivated day by day with small, consistent decisions. Sincere prayer, consistency between faith and life, forgiveness offered even when it is not understood. All of this builds an inner strength that does not depend on external circumstances. The Mother assures us that the soul that prepares itself in this way does not lose its peace even when everything around it is in turmoil. Mary warns that many seek security by accumulating external controls, forgetting that true balance is lost or maintained within. She observes that those most vulnerable to deception and fear are not those who lack information, but those who lack spiritual roots. Inner preparation creates these deep and firm roots, enabling one to discern when others are confused and to remain steadfast when others scatter. The Virgin insists that this preparation does not isolate one from reality, but rather empowers one to live it with serenity, acknowledging difficulties without being overwhelmed by them. As we approach the end of this section, the Virgin Mary makes a clear and personal appeal. Begin your inner preparation today. Don't wait for a stronger sign. Don't make grand promises that will later fade away. Choose a sincere and sustained change. Sharing this message and leaving a comment is also a way to commit your heart to this silent process of preparation. Mary promises to accompany with special care those who decide to strengthen themselves from within, because that strength will be the difference between confusion and clarity when times demand it. The message continues. In the next part, the Virgin Mary will speak about discernment, about how to distinguish truth from illusion, mature faith from fleeting emotion, and why this ability will be indispensable for remaining steadfast without falling into extremes. Stay tuned and don't turn away now, because each part prepares you to understand more deeply what is to come. The Virgin Mary reveals that one of the most necessary gifts in these times is discernment, because not everything that seems like light leads to truth, nor should everything that makes us uncomfortable be rejected. She explains that many will walk in confusion, not for lack of messages, but for lack of inner depth to interpret them. Mary observes that the world offers quick opinions, intense emotions, and fragmented truths that seduce the weary heart, but do not sustain it in the long run. Discernment, she says, is not born of haste or noise, but of a heart that has learned to listen, to wait, and to confront reality with humility. Without discernment, even good intentions can go astray. With discernment, even difficult moments become guides. The Virgin Mary explains that many confuse emotion with mature faith. She says that emotion can ignite passion, but it cannot always sustain it, while rooted faith remains even when the initial enthusiasm fades. In these times, Mary affirms, there will be messages that deeply move us, but do not lead to true conversion. And there will be quiet calls that do not impress us but transform our lives. Discernment allows us to distinguish between what flatters the ego and what builds up the soul, between what promises immediate relief and what builds lasting peace. The Mother invites us not to reject everything new out of fear, nor to accept everything new out of curiosity, but to examine it calmly, prayerfully, and consistently. According to the Virgin Mary, discernment also protects against extremes. She observes that some, upon spiritual awakening, are prone to excessive fear, searching for signs everywhere and losing their peace. Others, in reaction, minimize everything and take refuge in indifference to avoid commitment. Mary teaches that both extremes weaken the heart, fear paralyzes, and indifference numbs. Discernment maintains balance, allowing us to live attentively without despair and confidently without negligence. She reminds us that God does not call us to live in anguish, but vigilantly. He does not invite us to flee the world, but to inhabit it with truth. The Virgin Mary also reveals that discernment develops through daily practice. She explains that it is not a talent reserved for a select few, but a capacity that grows when a person examines their decisions, confronts their intentions, and allows themselves to correct their course. Discernment is strengthened when one learns to consider the consequences of their choices, to recognize when peace is genuine and when it is merely comfort, and to accept correction without hardening their heart. Mary assures us that those who cultivate this attitude become less easily manipulated, less vulnerable to deception, and more resilient in the face of external pressure. Discernment does not shout, accuse, or impose. It illuminates silently and guides with clarity. Mary warns that in the times ahead there will be conflicting voices, confusing messages, and subtle pressures that will attempt to divide hearts. She explains that only those who develop discernment will be able to remain steadfast without losing charity. Discernment allows us to say no without hatred, yes without naivete, and hope without anxiety. It is this inner balance, says the Virgin, that will allow us to walk with serenity even when others rush into impulsive decisions. That is why she insists on not delegating discernment to others, but rather cultivating a personal and vibrant relationship with God. As this section draws to a close, the Virgin Mary offers a practical and loving call. Seek discernment rather than immediate answers. Share this message and leave a comment if you wish to commit to a mature faith, capable of discerning and remaining steadfast without losing peace. Mary promises to intercede, especially for those who humbly seek discernment, for this desire opens the heart to clearer guidance. The message continues, and in the next part, the Virgin will speak of the silent decision each soul must make, a decision that will not always be visible, but which will define the inner course for the times to come. Stay alert and don't disconnect now, because what follows is crucial for those who wish to walk with clarity and confidence. The Virgin Mary reveals that after the warnings, the inner awakening and the discernment, the silent decision inevitably arrives, the one that isn't always announced, but that defines the soul's course. She explains that not all important decisions are made with words or public gestures. Many are made in private, in the heart, when no one is watching and when there is no external pressure. Mary says that this time will demand precisely these kinds of choices, decisions that don't seek approval or applause, but rather consistency. Staying, returning, correcting, renouncing, or persevering are acts that occur deep within and make a real difference, even if the world doesn't perceive them. The Virgin warns that not deciding is also a decision, and that constantly postponing weakens inner clarity. Mary explains that a silent decision often arises after an inner struggle. The person perceives the truth, recognizes what must change, but faces resistance, fear, or attachment. She observes that many try to bargain with their conscience, promising future changes while maintaining their present habits. However, the Virgin teaches that grace acts powerfully when the decision is made sincerely, even if it is small. A perfect or immediate change is not required, but rather a clear direction. An authentic decision guides the heart and allows God to act gradually without force, but profoundly. Mary affirms that heaven cooperates with those who decide, but cannot force those who resist. According to the Virgin Mary, this silent decision separates inner paths. It's not about judging others, but about understanding that each soul responds differently to the call. Some listen, feel, and act. Others listen, feel, and postpone. Still others listen and become distracted until the restlessness fades. Mary says that the present moment favors those who decide now, not because others are lost, but because current clarity is a grace that doesn't always last. Confusion grows when the conscience becomes accustomed to ignoring what it understands, while peace is consolidated when a person acts in accordance with what they know to be true. The Virgin Mary also warns that a silent decision doesn't always bring immediate relief. At first, it may generate discomfort, a sense of loss or bewilderment, because relinquishing what is familiar, even if harmful, can be unsettling. However, she assures us that this discomfort is fleeting when the decision is aligned with the truth. Little by little, the soul regains firmness, clarity, and a peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. Mary insists that those who decide with humility do not walk alone. Heaven accompanies every step taken in truth, even when there are no immediate visible signs. Mary reveals that many silent decisions made today will prevent greater pain tomorrow. She explains that God warns to protect, not to punish, and that every ignored warning increases vulnerability. The silent decision acts as a bridge between the warning and the protection, allowing grace to work before the confusion intensifies. That is why the Virgin Mary urges us not to minimize these inner moments, not to be distracted just when clarity appears. Remaining attentive to our conscience is an act of spiritual courage that strengthens the soul. As we approach the end of this section, the Virgin Mary extends a direct and personal invitation. Make your silent decision today. Don't make grand promises. Don't seek recognition. Choose consistency, even if no one notices. Sharing this message and leaving a comment is also a way to inwardly seal that decision, to declare that the awakening was not in vain. Mary promises to intercede for those who decide sincerely, because every decision made in truth attracts light and protection. The message continues. In the next part, the Virgin Mary will speak of those who remain steadfast, of the inexplicable peace, and of the protection that accompanies those who choose to trust even when the world is in turmoil. Stay alert and do not withdraw now, because what is coming brings hope and confirmation for persevering hearts. The Virgin Mary reveals that, amidst the confusion and growing noise of the world, there is always a silent group that refuses to be swept away, those who remain steadfast. She explains that these are not perfect or superior people, but rather souls who chose consistency when it was easier to be distracted, fidelity when it was more comfortable to procrastinate, and trust when many succumbed to fear or indifference. Mary says that these hearts do not draw attention to themselves because they do not seek the limelight, but their inner stability makes them invisible pillars that unknowingly support others. Remaining steadfast does not mean not feeling fear. It means not allowing fear to govern one's decisions. The Virgin affirms that this firmness does not come from pride or self-sufficiency, but from a constant and humble surrender. Mary explains that those who remain steadfast develop a different kind of peace, one that doesn't depend on favorable news or external circumstances. This peace, she says, is not euphoria or the absence of problems, but an inner certainty of not being alone. The Mother observes that these souls navigate difficulties with greater serenity because they learn to trust before they needed to. While others react impulsively, the steadfast respond with discernment. While others scatter, they remain centered. Mary teaches that this inner stability is built little by little through small, faithful decisions, sincere prayers, accepted silences, and a coherence cultivated even when no one is watching. The Virgin Mary also reveals that those who remain steadfast become a refuge for others without even trying. Tired, confused, or hurting people approach them seeking advice, calm, or simply presence. It's not that those who remain steadfast have all the answers, but rather that they transmit confidence, clarity, and peace. Mary explains that the world needs these silent beacons more than grand pronouncements, because in times of confusion, people find their bearings in the stability they perceive in others. Inner strength, she says, is a form of charity expressed without words. Mary warns that remaining steadfast is not easy when the pressure mounts. There will be moments of loneliness, misunderstanding, and weariness when it will seem that faithfulness has no immediate reward. However, the Virgin promises that no perseverance is ignored by heaven. Every consistent decision, every silent renunciation, and every act of trust leaves a spiritual imprint that strengthens both the individual and those around them. Mary assures us that this protection is not always visibly manifest, but it acts by anticipating greater dangers and sustaining our hearts in times of trial. The Virgin Mary reveals that those who remain steadfast do so not through their own strength, but because they have learned to rely on God. This conscious dependence makes them freer, not weaker. Mary insists that true strength comes from recognizing one's own fragility and entrusting it to heaven, not from denying it. Those who remain steadfast accept their limitations, but do not use them as an excuse to give up. They transform them into a point of encounter with grace. This attitude attracts special protection, an inner guidance that becomes clearer as the person remains faithful. As we approach the end of this section, the Virgin Mary offers a hopeful call. Remain. Remain in the truth even if it is uncomfortable. Remain in prayer even if it is difficult. Remain consistent even if it goes unrecognized. Sharing this message and leaving a comment is also a way of saying, I want to remain steadfast, and of strengthening others who struggle in silence. Mary promises to walk especially close to those who choose to remain, because in times of instability, silent faithfulness sustains more lives than one can imagine. The message is nearing its culmination. In the next and final part, the Virgin Mary will deliver a final, clear and decisive call that will unite all that has been revealed and provide concrete guidance for continuing the journey with peace and hope. Do not withdraw now, for the closing of this message contains the confirmation that many hearts have been waiting for. The Virgin Mary reveals that everything said thus far converges into a final, simple and profound call that can no longer be postponed. She explains that this message was not delivered to inform, but to transform, because knowing without acting hardens the heart, while listening and responding opens paths to peace. Mary says that each part spoke to a different dimension of the soul, to prepare the inner ground where this final call must fall. Now it is not a matter of further interpretation, but of serenely embracing what has already been understood. The time for merely listening ends when the moment arrives to live what has been understood. The Virgin clarifies that this call does not demand extraordinary gestures or visible radical decisions, but rather a clear orientation of the heart. She asks that faith once again take center stage, that consistency guide every small act, and that trust in God not be an emergency measure, but a way of life. Mary insists that it is not a matter of waiting for better times to begin, because preparation always begins in the present. Each day lived with attentiveness, prayer, and discernment builds a peace that does not depend on external events. The Mother affirms that those who live in this way do not lose their serenity even when the world is in turmoil, because their foundation is not in external stability, but in a living relationship with God. The Virgin Mary explains that this final call is also an invitation to stop living in inner division. Many believe one thing and live another. They desire peace but maintain habits that weaken it. They ask for light but avoid what is uncomfortable. Mary says that this division wearies the soul and confuses the conscience. The final call is to inner unity, to align faith and life, thought and action, desire and decision. When this happens, the Virgin affirms, the heart becomes steadfast, the mind clears, and peace begins to settle firmly. Mary reveals that the times will continue to demand discernment, preparation, and fidelity, but she also assures that those who respond to this call will not walk alone. The Virgin promises to accompany, especially those who choose to live awake, attentive and trusting, because every step taken in accordance with this faith attracts protection and guidance. She reminds us that faith lived with simplicity and constancy sustains more than grand pronouncements, and that silent perseverance has an eternal value that the world cannot measure, but heaven recognizes. The Blessed Mother then makes one final request. Do not keep this message to yourself. Sharing it and leaving a comment is not a mechanical act, but an inner declaration that this call has been heard and embraced. Mary affirms that many souls will only awaken because someone decided to share it in time, without fear or shame. This simple gesture becomes an act of love that heaven uses to touch weary and confused hearts. She promises to intercede for those who become bridges, because whoever helps awaken another also strengthens their own path. The Virgin Mary concludes by saying that it is not fear that should guide our next steps, but vigilant trust. Remaining attentive, praying sincerely, discerning calmly, and living consistently will be the keys to navigating any time without losing our peace. She invites us to continue this journey with serenity, knowing that each day is an opportunity to choose the truth anew. The message ends here, but the call continues, because the spiritual life is not a single event but a constant journey. Mary bids farewell for now, leaving behind a profound certainty. Those who listen, respond, and trust never walk in darkness. And for those who wish to delve deeper into these messages, the Virgin will continue speaking, revealing, and guiding in the next encounter, because heaven does not abandon those who choose to remain awake.